Today on Roll for Crit, we're taking you to distant, unexplored planets with our review of the game Far Away from Cherry Picked Games. This is a cooperative game for 2 players. Each player is an explorer working for the Federation Alliance, and you're seeking out strange new life and resources on other worlds, trying to accomplish missions for the Federation Alliance, and hopefully you'll be able to do so before you succumb to hunger or loneliness.
This game takes place over multiple scenarios, but more often than not, it'll look something similar to this. You'll usually start at a crash site, get a mission update from the Federation about either building specific buildings or finding unique resources, depending on what they need you to do. Now, you and your compatriot could be on the same space or different spaces. Now, what's important is while you're together, you may chat and strategize. However, should you split up, you got radio silence. So you got to be careful and try to guess what your friends are doing based on how he moves or reacts to certain situations. You may not always be lucky enough to be on the same hex as your partner at the start of a round, so remember, if you're far away, keep an eye on them because you can't tell them what you're going to do. Each round consists of you and your partner taking turns back and forth until each of you have done 3 actions. There are many different things that you can do on an action as well as some free ones, but let's go over some of those ones you have to use an actual action point for. The first is moving. Very simple. You can move in a straight line for as long as you want until you either hit an end where you can explore a new hex, or you hit a creature because they're scary and you got to stop to see what they're going to do. The next thing you can do, if you're with a creature, is attack it. You take a hunger and you deal a point of damage to them. You don't always have to fight the creature. You can choose to scare it away. This involves moving it away from you a number of hexes. However, for each hex you move it away, you gain a loneliness, because it's sad that the creature left you, even if it was huge, had tons of claws, and more eyes than you'd like to count. Outside of dealing with creatures, there are a few other actions. You can do a building action. Usually this consists of building, a building in an empty hex in which you can choose either from the standard buildings they have out that you can see here, or maybe some very specific ones for the scenario. An example of this would be the Xenolab, which allows you not only to give a passive ability of eating alien meat, but will also allow you to build some upgrades, the other thing you can choose to build. Now, the last thing you can do is a use action. This is really simple. Some cards or special events may be required to use, such as interacting with an item or maybe destroying something. It really depends on what you read. Now, there are some free actions. These are pretty much things that won't take up an action. You can do them as much as you want. There is socializing. This is if you're on the same hex as someone, you can remove all loneliness from both players because you're talking with each other, you're chatting it up, sharing the most recent gossip, and feeling a little bit better about yourself. There is consuming, which is usually consuming a resource. More often than not, it's going to be consuming plant material or meat to get rid of hunger because you are a person and you're very hungry. Then there's also interacting with different items, which is pretty much picking up, dropping, or trading with people.
Once both explorers have taken their 3 actions, then there are a few more steps in the round to keep up with the board state and different things you need to move around as the planet around you is alive in a sense, and might be helping you or hindering you as things go on. First, if there are any drones on the board, then they're going to move and take an action. Drones could appear from specific missions, or you might be able to build your own, and they can help you. You can use them to gather things for you or to attack enemies. But most of the time, you're going to be dealing with a lot of creatures that you're running into as things go on. There are 2 types of creatures, den creatures and wandering creatures. Den creatures have a specific home on the board that they spawn at and like to return to, whereas wandering creatures can really go all over the place. They also have different behaviors. Some of them like to travel in packs, some of them like to be by themselves, some of them are meat eaters, some of them are plant eaters, some of them have their own special, unique actions that no others have. Maybe they can burrow through buildings, or they can move extra spaces. All kinds of unique, crazy animals. Not any normal animals. They're all outer space alien animals, and a lot of them want to kill you. So each one will get to move, and they'll also get to take an action, and those actions depend on what's in their environment. So a lot of them are food-driven. They might want to attack another creature. They might want to attack you if you're there. They might be looking for specific types of resources. There is a chart that will guide you through this, but a lot of it is meant to be the player's own own logic and reasoning and determining how these creatures would behave based on their descriptions and their symbols that tell you if they're aggressive or defensive or passive, etc. If a creature does attack you, you will be rolling this die, and that die could result in you receiving an injury, which is something that will give you a negative effect. It might lessen the amount of damage you can take before you're killed, or it might make your movement slower. It could do all kinds of things that will hurt you as the game goes on. If you receive a hunger symbol, then you take one of your hunger tokens and place it on top of your board. If you get 5 of those, then you starve to death, so that's very bad. There's a small chance that you'll manage to domesticate the creature. Then you actually get to ride it around and use it for your own personal benefit. That's a lot of fun, but is something that would be challenging to do in most cases. Once you're done resolving the creature's actions and movements, each player is going to roll a pair of dice that will determine whether or not you spawn any new creatures and where they go. And then you're each going to gain 1 hunger and 1 loneliness because time is passing and you're sad and you're getting hungry. Finally, you will double check to see if you completed any of those mission requirements. As the game goes on, if you complete one, you will be flipping the card over, and usually it will give you new instructions. And then ultimately, once you've completed that goal, you're going to need to repair your crash site using a certain number of resources. You'll get to flip that over, and then you fly home. And you'll also be graded at the end of each mission. You may receive credits, which you can use towards the next mission for certain benefits. And depending on how well you did or what kind of a path that you took, you might get even different benefits, new upgrades. They could be permanent or temporary. And then there are contingency missions. And some of those you can choose to do. Some of them will happen to you if certain things befall you. So a lot of different things could happen on a mission. Plus, there are a ton of those creatures, and it's totally random which ones are going to spawn. You're going to have a max of 8 for each game that you play. So even if you see the same kinds of hexes or get some of the same resources, it's always going to feel like a very different environment because those creatures are very different and they really have a huge impact on how the game goes.
It's very interesting because you'll be playing a bunch of different missions, and with each one, like Jonathan said, you'll earn a different amount of credits and bonuses, which is very interesting to carry on to the next game because you're wondering, oh, wow, this item was really good. Should we try to upgrade it sooner in the next one? It might actually not be useful in the next mission. It could be just worked really well then. It will require you to really learn how to adapt to each situation. And in particular, you're going to adapt in a really weird way of role-playing as the animals. You're going to read the card, and it could say something similar to along the lines of, it is an aggressive creature that ignores smaller creatures, but prefers to eat the leftovers of carcasses. Which means if you see the creature, you're like, well, it's probably going to ignore that small health monkey-like creature. And there is already a killed creature over there. It might go for that. Each one has these very interesting twists on there that may cause you to decide. You have to talk to each other like, what would that do? How would this act? If you happen to have watched a lot of creature shows, or maybe you're a biology major, this is going to be great because you'll be like, oh, there's a boar in Africa that does something similar, so that's how it's going to move. It becomes a very interesting conversation back and forth. It's actually where most of the talking is going to happen because otherwise, you got to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, that's the other big thing in the game, as we said, is that if you're not in the same hex, you are doing your own thing completely. For the creatures, they give you a little bit of leeway. It's sort of up to your discretion how much you discuss and what you do. They recommend that maybe you split it up so one person controls half the creatures, for instance. But when we played, we sort of were just collaborated on how we thought they should work and what they should do. And yeah, it's a fascinating thing. At first, it was very intimidating to me, and they do, like I said, have a chart that you can reference, and you can just say, oh, this creature is aggressive, and these are the conditions, so it's going to fight, or it's going to run away, or something. But as it goes on, you sort of feel like you get to know the creatures, and their behaviors are meant to be consistent. So if you made a decision early on, you should stick with it, and if that situation comes up again, the creature will do that same thing. And it really does give the game, I felt, this sensation of being alive, like feeling like you really are on an unexplored planet. And, you know, sometimes the creatures will do things you don't want them to do. They're gonna maybe attack you or go after buildings or resources that you're trying to protect. But you're doing what you think they would do if they really existed. And it's a fascinating mechanic.
I mean, I love it a lot. I've watched a lot of old Discovery channels back in my youth when it was about animals and creatures and nature. And so when you look at these creatures, it becomes a really interesting discussion, like I said, of like, okay, so this creature likes to avoid would attack this though. Well, this isn't really a predator, and for the most part, probably would recognize each other as not really aggressive to each other. However, if something weird happens, like there's one creature that when it gets spooked goes on a rampage, well, yeah, it's going to charge into anything and maybe hit your buildings. You have to talk about that and think about how these creatures would react. I mean, evolution tends to find similar paths if there are similar problems to be solved. But going to the non-talking part, it's very interesting, a little bit like Magic Maze. Not as partyish because it's just the two of you, and there's no timer usually. And what becomes interesting is some of the upgrades or injuries will affect that. For example, there's an injury, I forget the name of it, but you can't point or anything. So then you have to be much more careful about communication. And then there was an option you could purchase as well, which allows you to like get walkie-talkies and stuff. So it's very interesting how you sort of learn to read each other and be like, okay, he's moved that far. I guess he's going to go for that. So I should do this instead.
Yeah, it really immerses you in the game because you actually, I mean, you gain these loneliness tokens every time you're away from your partner, and you start to feel that too in real life, not being able to communicate. And when you're together, you're like, okay, here's the plan. We're going to do this and this. But then once you get past a few steps, it's not always so easy to come back together and rediscuss things anew. So you have to then come up with on the fly, okay, so I think he's going to do this. Or you have to pay attention and be like, oh, he's really hungry and I have some food, so I should really head back and help him out. And those kinds of decisions are really fascinating. It also cuts down on alpha gaming of any kind because, you really just can't. It's at a certain point, you can get together and do your best to plan things out, but at a certain point, you're on your own. And I don't know that, like Magic Maze is maybe the closest thing I can think of in terms of that. Or, I guess other games limit communication like Hanabi or something, but nothing really does it quite in this way that's that thematic, I think.
Well, because it makes sense. And speaking of which, the Federation, they are really cheap to not even provide us walkie-talkies.
Yeah, that's something else, too, on that note. A lot of the game has a really great sense of humor. The descriptions, everything has a funny acronym. It's tongue-in-cheek in a cute way. So I thought it was a really nice balance of kind of, in some ways, really realistic depictions of alien creatures, but also sort of a funny sense of humor.
Crits and misses for Far Away.
Crits. The way that creatures move and act allows players to be creative and makes the world feel alive.
Thinking how these animals would act in a real-life experience instead of just how they could benefit you in-game turns out to be a fantastic role-playing and thought experience.
Not being able to communicate throughout the entire game keeps you thinking for yourself and thinking on your feet, but makes it even more rewarding when you can come together and make a new plan.
Removing communication while you are separated allows you to explore and grow on your own, while if you really need to, you can come back together in order to rehash out your plans.
With a set of very unique missions included, as well as randomly chosen creatures and tiles, every time you play, it's going to feel like an entirely new experience.
Now for the multiple irritating system stopper, or miss. Because of these softer rules about how the animals will act, there's going to be some questions when you first learn about the animals and how they interact with either each other or the players, or how some of the players' gears may change with the way the animals think. You're going to have some extra time added to your playthroughs of this game.
Not everyone is going to have fun and be able to fully embrace the role-playing style of those creatures, and for those types of players, they're going to find those sections a bit of a drag. Far Away is a really unique two-player co-op game. It reminds me in some ways of Robinson Crusoe, or even something like Seventh Continent. These games where you're exploring vast places and finding crazy new things. But I think what makes it really special is that two-player nature of it, that it's strictly between you and someone else. There actually is a suggested third player variant where someone else just controls the creatures, which I think would be fun. We didn't get to try that. But there's something that makes you feel this bond to the other person. You really have to work together. And I love how immersive that feeling of it is. It can be a long game. It can go long, especially maybe with the way we play it, which is very defensively. We're like trying very hard to avoid danger and do everything perfectly and efficiently. But for me, I was always pretty happy to enjoy that longer experience. If you've got the time for it and you've got someone else who is up for this kind of an adventure, there's a lot of super cool, novel ideas in there.
I find a lot of long games usually end in two ways. You either look at the clock and you're like, wow, really? It's that time? Or you're like, yeah, that felt like X amount of hours. This definitely falls in the first one. You didn't realize time flew by that fast because you're all just thinking about how to move around. And it's very interesting playing it as a two-player game because, many two-player games are very like interactive. You're really going head-to-head or even working together in the crazy combos or something. In this, because of the nature where you're forced to not talk, it becomes this weird silence. I guess even loneliness, maybe you could bring it. You can call it that. That it becomes interesting when you get back together and you're like, yes, okay, I loved what you did there. This is what I was planning to do. You think that's good? Great. Okay, we'll follow through with that. And it's very weird. It's not the same kind of planning I think of other cooperative games like Pandemic or Spirit Island. It feels different.
Yeah, and that's a lot of this game, even though there's things we can compare it to me feels very different. I don't think there is much out there like it. And Cherry Picked Games is a really fascinating publisher because I feel like everything they've done is totally unique from their other games. They've done an RPG, they did a drinking party game, they did a storytelling game. This really is their first, I believe, more traditional kind of board game with like tiles and dice and pieces. And I think they knocked it out of the park. And I think this is probably my favorite thing that they've put out so far. Easy to recommend if you want a two-player co-op game. It's available right now, and it is called Far Away. And if you have played it, we'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. How have your travels gone? Who was your partner? How did it work? Maybe your team wasn't as smooth as ours was. And really, how did you deal with those creatures too? Because that can change so much, how players choose to feel like they should interact. It can really be an entirely different experience.
I mean, you and I, the little flavor text they included in the creatures, we were like, all right, it mentioned this, so that has to be how it acts. Some people may be like, nope, it says aggressive and this. That's all it cares about. I'm very curious how your group handles that. But for now, we're about time to sign off, which means our communications are going to come to an end. But no matter how far away you are, we'll still read your comments.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. When we're in the same hex, at least. I'm Jonathan.
I'm Will.
And this has been Roll for Crit. Here's an idea. Support our Patreon or like and subscribe to this channel for more.
Subscribing gives you a +2 to your charisma stat.